Good morning, everybody. From Bar Harbor to Toms River, and from St. Louis up to Detroit, this is Free Atlantic Radio, the voice of the Northeastern nation. I am your host, Tom Kawczynski. Welcome to the program. Today's date is Monday, October 5th, 2020. It's almost 6:30 in the morning as I'm beginning recording here out on the East Coast up in Maine. I want to thank you for listening in. Remind you that you can find all shows at www.atlantichomeland.com. The Twitter is Atlantic_Nation. Venmo, for those who like to support the program, and it's much appreciated, is at CVCPRV. And you can always send your commentary to P.O. Box 35, Greenville Junction, Maine 04442. So what we are going to do, let me just give you a quick programming note before we go deeper into this. I had a conversation, and there was a little bit of a mix-up as we've been changing things forward, which is why there was no Friday episode. But Kanaz will be doing the Friday episodes from now on because I have some other stuff I have to do. However, I am back with you for Mondays, Wednesdays, and then Friday evenings. I take your questions on YouTube, and eventually we're going to have more content. There's just some behind-the-scenes stuff going on that need to be handled, and if you don't have some behind-the-scenes stuff you're handling, then you're probably missing out on what you need to be doing, because let's be honest, things are getting kind of strange out there, and that's going to be the purpose of today's episode. I went on Twitter to talk to our audience, and I got about 4,000 followers over there. And like I say, follow over at Atlantic_Nation. The number one comment I was asked to comment upon, and there were some good ones that may make the foundation for future shows, is a sort of a situation report of what's happening. And I can understand why people would want that. You know, historically, what I used to do, especially when I had Coronavirus Central, is I'd put a show together on a certain topic. But sometimes it's easier to follow the news a little bit, and there's been a lot going on. You know, President Trump being in the hospital is one part of that, related to COVID, having that. And we'll talk about that a little bit in the first part of the program, what's going on with that situation, what my read is on it. But then we'll spend most of the program, I'm going to try to use it talking to you about communication, about preparation, and about useful skills. As we sit here on October 5th, we are now, what would we be, 29 days out from Election Day, and it's an election that promises, whatever the result is, to be highly contentious, potentially violent, and there's a lot of problems about that. And I want you to be ready for that. I want your family to be safe. I want you to be mentally aware. And to the extent it's possible, I'm going to try to give you some advice of what I think is happening out there in the bigger scheme of things and how that connects to decisions you should make. And hopefully that will prove helpful to you. I mean, it's really hard for me to pick out the little pieces of what's happening out there because what I see in the broader sense is a world in disarray. I see that we have wars and rumors of wars. The Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict threatens to blow up into something much larger. Last night I was reading that the Iranians have been warning both sides for weapons coming into their territory, that Armenia has targeted an airport and potentially dam facilities inside Azerbaijan rather than the contested area of, Nagorno-Karabakh. And this has the potential to get much bigger, especially as the Armenians claim to have shot down a Turkish jet, and they're saying the Russians are going to come in and help them. Now, I don't know if any of this is true or if it's propaganda, but this thing does not seem to be getting smaller or lesser, and given all the other conflicts happening around the world, it's something to keep an eye on, that this is yet another flashpoint. The conflict between Israel and Iran is a flashpoint. Pakistan and India is always a flashpoint. India and India and China is a potential flashpoint. China and Taiwan is a flashpoint. In all these areas, there's enough chafing where one event goes the wrong way, and you could see a very large war workout. So keep that in the back of your mind, that there are bits and pieces of what could be either a smaller war, a regional war, or in much the same way World War I, or in some ways the French and Indian War, actually, which was called the 7 Years' War outside the United States, when you could see a much larger war precipitate very quickly. So that's one thing you need to be keeping an eye on, and if it happens, it'll happen real quick. And why it would happen, it could be something almost fluky in terms of what happens out there, but I don't think so. I think that this is going to go upon a sort of moving trajectory where we're going to see this chafing, let's call it, continue and accelerate through this month and into the winter months, which will be interesting because winter wars are ugly anyway. But, when we think about ugly wars, what's uglier than a civil war? And we sit here perched on the edge of one here in the United States, where I was reading now, I think it was in WorldNet Daily, they were saying that 52% of Americans now are preparing actively in expectation that there's going to be a civil war. Now, surveys are surveys, but nonetheless, I think that reflects an awareness amongst a whole bunch of people that what we have reached is a sort of political impasse that will not easily be solved. And so at the heart of that is the question of Donald John Trump, the 45th president of the United States, who is presently, if you believe what the media tells you, in the hospital for treatment for COVID. Now, people have asked me so many times, do I think he actually has COVID? And my answer is I don't know. They've asked me, do I think he's at the hospital? I'm like, I don't know that either. I've watched the videos that were put out there, but I think all of us know that videos can be put out from anywhere easily enough. And, a number of people had commented on various sites throughout the internet that, at least with the earlier videos, it looked like he was on a ship somewhere, given the role and the pitch and the yaw of the camera. And I think that is true. It did look that way to me. So where might President Trump be? That's a really good question. And how sick is he? I was reading some reviews of the camera work, and it's almost as if he's in similar positions where they took a bunch of videos beforehand, and then he went under for some reason. Is he hiding because there's some foreign event happening that's a danger to the United States or other countries? Is he just that sick? Or is it just, paranoia? And my answer to you is I can't really tell you much, but I do think it's interesting, the timing of this, because let's talk about it first from the health perspective, what's going on there. What President Trump has been given is the experimental, what do they call it, monoclonal antibodies by Regeneron. And what these are essentially is they're putting antibodies into him whose purpose is to go ahead and fight the virus directly. So assuming that this is a regular strand of coronavirus, of the COVID-19 infection, because where he got this is an interesting question. A lot of people think, given the number of Republicans getting sick, also given the number of people who were at that Cleveland debate getting sick, that perhaps this was something that was planted. And maybe that's possible. I don't know. I don't know what security measures were in there, and I don't know what measures were taken. Conversely, it's kind of really interesting timing, though, beyond that, because when you look at the political aspects of this, what it means is that the smear campaign that was surely planned for October against Trump now has to be somewhat restrained, because no one likes when you pick on a sick person. Well, no one except Twitter anyway. But ultimately, you have a situation where we have the president being absent in the middle of the campaign season. And what has been, quite frankly, the most bizarre campaign I've ever seen. And it's a campaign where I don't think anyone feels confident about the results. Between questions of mail-in voting, between questions of who can vote and who can't vote, sickness, people wanting to go to the polls, people not going to the polls, electronic voting machines. What we have is the perfect confluence of events to create the absolute largest amount of mistrust of the veracity of the polling that comes forward from what the voting results are. And I think every side will probably be given evidence to argue their case after the election ends, whether you think Trump should win, whether you think Biden should win, or whether you're not invested in it at all. But the thing that's interesting is I think that's the story, and that's where I kind of want to pick up for today, because I can't tell you what's happening with President Trump. I can tell you that we can keep an eye on other events happening around the country and around the world and see if it makes sense for him to be in hiding. We will also find that information will come out eventually, the world being what it is, that will leak if his condition is getting far worse. And there are rumors of that. I saw an Israeli website, for instance, that was suggesting he was in the hospital on IV and on a ventilator, and that, Pence was acting as president. Do I believe it? Nah, not yet. But it could be true, and I don't have information to either bolster or deny those claims because there's fog of war. And as there's one thing you should have learned about the media by now, it's that everyone's out there lying to you. And it's kind of interesting. That's what I want to be. I want to be the person who's not lying to you. So let me start by a little soliloquy of sorts on the alternative media. And I watch and consume probably an unhealthy amount of alternative media, as well as some mainstream media, but mostly alternative media. And I will say a funny thing has happened to the alternative media. Whereas 10 or 15 years ago, you would have turned on alternative sources all across the spectrum, really, because there's its own, what happens is the mainstream media historically was kind of set up on a right to left spectrum, or at least that became the case after the Cold War ended. I would argue it was always sort of a left tilting thing, but it doesn't really matter. That's not the purpose of the conversation today. What's more important is to think that the alternative media primarily consisted of people who had a particular area of interest or a particular topic that drew them forward, sort of like Coronavirus Central did with You're Listening to Me for many of you. I mean, some of you have known me a little bit longer than that, but not most of you. And then what happens is they build outward from that, like Mike Adams' Natural News is an example. Or if you want to pick the big example, Alex Jones really came out of 9/11 Truth and questioning what happened to Tower 7. A good question. It never got answered, by the way. And what happened is, over time, they built up sort of networking infrastructure around them to do these things. But alternative media was usually focused on topics with a high degree of skepticism of the political situation around them. However, something began to change in the last decade. And what has happened, and it really became solidified during the Trump campaign, is that the alternative media, by and large, there are exceptions, but the 10 biggest sites, let's say, that are out there have all become very ideological. And there was always a sort of libertarian bent, the idea that there was a mistrust and skepticism of government. Think like a Glenn Greenwald, sort of like questioning of what would be true out there. But As things have gone forward, one of the more remarkable things of the Trump campaign and of the Trump presidency is that the alternate media has basically fallen in lockstep behind the Republican Party. And I think this has happened because the Democrats and I shouldn't say the Democrats, I should be fair. What happened is the left, having been overrun by cancel culture, the woke culture that says we need to silence those who disagree with us, the insanity that has been overwhelmingly indoctrinated onto the millennials and comes straight from Marx and the Communist Manifesto, has made it such that people who disagree with that and who have seen voices being shut down have run to Trump for support because they think there's no other option. And they've gotten to something I talk about in my new book, In God We Must. It isn't the purpose of the book at all, but it's a useful concept. The doctrine of the lesser good, or what you could say is that, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Or you could say, I'm choosing the lesser of two evils. But the problem is, as you learn in this world, is it's often the case the easiest way to control someone is to have the enemy of your enemy be still your enemy, just coming at you from a different side. And why do I mention this? Because it's one of the hardest things about commenting on the news today. Everyone is shaping and sculpting the news to benefit a certain partisan outlook and a certain partisan outcome. If you listen to the mainstream media, the whole thing is shaped to benefit Democrats, the left, and the idea that party should get in power. Increasingly, if you listen to alternative media, the whole thing is put out there in a way where once the whole model was about skepticism and it was about asking important questions, now it's we must elect Trump or something terrible is going to happen. And I will say, I've seen not just in the alternative news community, but even in the evangelical community, which is a different community I don't talk about as much, there's almost a messianic complex around Trump because he's been presented as this singular heroic figure standing against the machine. And whether you believe it in its full form of insanity, the Q people, who basically have a faith in this person that's totally opposite what happens, in this belief that there will be this great moment of apotheosis where we have this sudden great victory, or whether you have a more moderate view of it where you're just saying that, look, we have to support Trump because Trump's the only one who won't throw us in jail, which is what a lot of people on the dissident positions outside the mainstream have been saying. We have now been engineered into a position where all of what we say, all of what we promote, all of our ideas have become secondary to the political conflict at the heart of this, where we are given a choice between a left wing that promises, in an optimistic view of it, a utopian version of humanity where our every need will be met and social justice will endure, and we live in a happy world of love, but where historically that has led usually to people in death camps because they don't agree, and violence where we will get attacked if you don't give us what we want, versus a right wing that says we are going to re-embrace liberty and do the things that were in the great American tradition, but that fundamentally has looked much more like a bad dream of what George Bush imagines at Gitmo. And as you watch Donald Trump talk about Operation Warp Speed, about forced vaccination programs being put around there, like it's happening in Australia. The wife sent an article to me where they are literally now giving them authority to take people out of their cars, strip them on the side of the road, and vaccinate them even if they don't want it. And this is supposed to be for our health and welfare. Something isn't adding up. But unfortunately, the voices in the alternative media who should be calling out Operation Warp Speed and who should be looking at Moderna and mRNA vaccines and who should be looking at quantum dot technologies that are being put forward, this idea that you can change the way the human body works, don't, because they have to carry water for Trump. And this is one of the things. And I just have to say this to you. I've pissed off. The entire left hates me. I know. I get to read all the articles they put. And there are people, I'm not even joking you, who will be listening to this show just so they can try to get a hit piece on me. And they know who they are. And you know what? I pray for you guys. I mean, at some point, don't you have something better to live for? But the right is becoming just as bad. And I'm not surprised that the lockstep Republicans would do that. That's fine. I mean, it's not great, but it's not unexpected. But the alternative media is selling out their own credibility so that they can defend Trump. And this is one of the things I have to tell you. Trump is not the good guy in this story. And it's not because of the things, the left would say it's, well, he's racist and he's horrible things. I don't think it's that at all. I think it's just that he doesn't do what he says he's going to do. He does the opposite of it all the time, and he gets away with it because he constantly puts A against B. And I'm not saying it's just him, by the way, but I'm saying that he is a symptom of a much bigger sickness. And I will be honest with you, I have reached the point in my thinking, you don't have to agree with me, I'm sure many of you won't, especially if you come from a right-wing perspective, that Donald Trump is controlled opposition. And I say that with some pain because I put quite a bit of effort into his candidacy the first time around. But as I've told you on the radio, and people get mad at me for this, I'm not voting in this catastrophe. This is terrible. First off, I don't believe in democracy, which I've told you a million times. But I also don't believe that he's going to do what he says he's going to do. I believe all Donald Trump serves is as a lightning rod to divide people further against one another. And that's not helpful. And look, Joe Biden would be a terrible alternative. I have no love for him either. And you're saying, well, what's the choice? The choice is to work with one another, and the choice is to separate yourself from this clown show. And people will say, well, you have to vote for Trump, or these terrible things will happen. The terrible things are going to happen. This is the point of it, because I'm looking at what Donald Trump's doing. So let's go into Donald Trump's background for just a minute, because people don't look at his background. The things I know about Donald Trump. Donald Trump was trained by Roy Cohn, the guy who was responsible for getting Joe McCarthy in trouble, who worked in the sort of slums of New York to some extent, and who understood how to play the media game. This was a guy who ran casinos for years, and if you know anything about the casino scene, you know it's all about money laundering and ways you move things around in the world. He was beloved on media and set up by the same people who supposedly hate him for decades to become a national fixture. Going back into the 80s, I remember Trump had his game show and he had his TV thing, and people think it's a joke, but ultimately the guy was gifted name ID beyond recognition, and what did he grow up in? He grew up in, Norman Vincent Peale, the idea of the power of positive thinking. Perfect example of the prosperity gospel that now infects the evangelical church. And this idea, if you just believe it, it's going to be true. Well, how much different is that than the idea that we have 57 genders? It's not. It's the mirror image of it. And what you begin to realize is that Trump has always been this kind of guy who can be a chameleon, and he's clever. And look, he went out there and he knew how to say what people wanted to hear, and people chose to believe him because people on the right generally speaking, are willing to give people the benefit of the doubt about a good faith conversion. But think of Trump. Trump supposedly is the defender of the Christian cause in America. He doesn't mention Christ once. Trump's the guy who's going to go ahead and stop, people coming across the border. The wall never got built. Trump stands against corruption, but you never see these people get fired. You never see anyone get prosecuted except his own associates, as if they're the accomplices that need to be moved aside. And so when you look at everything Trump has done, beyond what he said and beyond the people who attack him so conveniently right on time, to the point where you're not even given the space to think, what have we had with Donald Trump? We've had a rather ineffectual guy who spent a lot of time working on foreign policy, who basically made sure that a whole bunch of money went to corporations, right? That has allowed the Fed to consolidate control of the entire economy, who did ultimately shut down the country, rightly or wrongly, and who's gone forward with that. And that he makes a lot of promises, like he's saying, we're going to label Antifa as domestic terrorists and KKK, and then he doesn't do it. And that's what Trump does. He talks and talks and talks. He is the weapon of mass distraction. And I know that's going to piss people off, because they're going to say, well, what's your choice? You're going to put a Democrat in there who's going to throw you in jail? Well, here's the problem with Trump. They're going around now. You look at the people who are in charge. They got this Operation Warp Speed thing coming forward. And what they're promising to do is say that if you don't want to comply with this, if you don't want to comply with the vaccine so the economy can move forward, well, eventually you're probably going to be judged for mandatory, and you're going to have to do it. And they had something called the Vaccine Congress. I mean, did you know that Donald Trump is partnering with Bill Gates and the Gavi Immune Organization to go ahead and make this happen? And you're told these people are on opposite sides, that these things are working against one another. But they're not. I mean, wake up. George Soros funded Jared Kushner. There's family relationships between these people. What you are being given is a show on a stage, ladies and gentlemen. And the show is the politics. And the reality is you are being distracted while these things are being taken from you. Your property is being dispossessed by an economy that's been deliberately shut down from you, right? You are being set up to go into a fight against one another so that people who've stolen everything from you won't have to be held to account. And if we had an honest alternative media, even 10 years ago, man, I remember there were lefties who were out there doing Operation Operation the Wall Street thing, that they were trying to shut down Occupy Wall Street. That's what it was. And they would have been calling out the Fed for robbing everyone, but they can't because they're obsessed over Trump. And the right would have been saying, hey, these vaccines, what's in them? They're putting modules in there. They've been shown in the lab. They can change your RNA however they want to produce whatever you want. They would be calling out, but they're not, because they're defending Trump. And so what is Trump doing? Trump is creating a gigantic pathway. He is a vacuum into which everything else is being sucked in, and there's nothing left. And that's what we see in America, where there's nothing left. We see in America where there's no civility, there's no decency, there's no news, there's no reason. There's just this war of ideology where one side says, I hate him, and one side says, we love him. And it's not about him. It's about you. It's about us. It's not about who is right. It's about what is right. And this is the problem. And it's brilliant, I have to say. It's a brilliant example of what can happen in a dialectic when you have the same people controlling. Because let's be honest, the media attacks Trump. The media is owned by the big corporations, right? And the big corporations are owned by the banks. The same banks that are essentially endorsing Trump's policy. So we have these stage-acted plays that accomplish one important thing. We're not asking good questions. We're not asking, what is the Fed doing with all the things they've purchased? We're not asking, what is in these vaccines and why are we being set up to be forced to take them? We're not asking, why are we seeing all these wars get close to breaking out around the globe? There's 100 questions, and we'll try to cover some of them here on Free Atlantic Radio. But the thing about it is, we have been manipulated to a point where we think the only solution is to support this side or that side. And what I'm telling you is the same people are funding both sides. The same people are scripting this out. And do I think that means that every person on the left knows about it or every person on the right? Of course they don't. That's why it works. Because the key thing to a successful conspiracy is pretty simple. All you have to do is have the right lies in the right places, and you let people do what comes to them naturally. And what comes to Americans naturally at this point is fighting life and death over questions of ideology and politics. And that's what we see happening. We see the right getting ready quietly in their suburbs and rural areas, arming up, getting ready for a war and preparing for the idea the cities are going to revolt. And we see that on the other side, the very media that you would think would be trying to preserve a system is basically encouraging people tacitly, allowing terrorists to plan on places like Twitter and Facebook. Let's be honest. Violent actions. They're going to go ahead and make this country unworkable if they don't get what they want. Well, both sides are being engineered into a fight. And for what? Do you think you're going to get social justice? I mean, you're going to get the equality that always comes from government totalitarianism. That's the death. You will get your red revolution. It will be blood. Blood on the streets of everywhere. And it will be blood from Democrats and blood from Republicans and blood from white people and blood from black people and blood from everyone who's here. And when that's done, we might get blood from someone invading us, because Lord knows a lot of people are looking at that. You don't think a whole bunch of money's coming into the United States from other places to destabilize the system? And why does it happen? What is the point of all of it is, And until you ask me, we've reached the point where technology is about to render the mass of humanity superfluous. If you've studied history, and I know you haven't, maybe some of you have, but I know you were never educated in it unless you sought it out privately, because the school system doesn't teach you. The crisis of the last, call it quarter century, in terms of just a secular reading of it, was that the elites used to have control over society. And what happened was that the nature of how mechanization changed things required much more participation by human labor, and therefore there had to be a much larger pretense that they cared about what the people thought. And because of that, nationalism arose, and communism arose, and all these big philosophies that were basically different methodologies to get people toward mass mobilization came forward. And what happened is sometimes the people got mad and they chopped off royal heads, like the Jacobins in France or the Bolsheviks in Russia, or frankly, the Antifa would here in the United States. Trump's head is being put up on a platter. But the thing about it is, it didn't make life better for them. It led to, in every case, thousands or millions of people dying. It led to decades of instability, of poverty, of famine, of hunger. And this is what happens every time you do it. But the elites who do this, why would they do it? Well, this is how you engineer the rebirth of a civilization. Because what happens, there's always a strongman on the other side of it. You get a Napoleon, you get a Stalin, you get a Hitler. And that's what they want. They want a system where you don't have to have control. And this is how democracy always ends, by the way. Democracy always ends with the people themselves destroying their civilization in a mob and demanding a strong man take over. And maybe at this point it's being set up big enough to be a global takeover. That is what should happen according to basic historical analysis. But you're not allowed that, because you're caught up in your own beliefs and your idea that your beliefs really matter. On some level they do, but in the big scheme of things they really don't, because we are all going into the shredder. And the only chance we have is to step aside. The train is barreling down the tracks. We can all see it. The Trump train's going along, and whether it's the banditos chasing it or the people who are on it trying to outrun them, thinking they're going to change things, ultimately what you see very clearly when you look at it is everywhere they're going, it just goes into a giant cliff and a chasm that's full of, it's a burning abyss. And that is what we are being set up for here in the United States. And I would argue it's the case with our allies as well. But a lot of this goes back to communication and the tricks that are being played against you. And the trick that's being played is a very simple one, but it works. It's that if you believe A, and someone else believes B, that you begin looking to person C who is attacking B as a potential ally. And it is through this trick that, call it the Hegelian dialectic. You could call it, even if you want to be biblical about it, you could call it the root of good and evil. It's no accident. This is one of the reasons why you got to read your Bibles, people. I mean, even if you don't, you should embrace the spiritual aspect of it, because your salvation's caught up in it. But even if you don't, in the very first story in humanity, basically, once the fall happens, is man had two choices. He had the choice to either serve that which is good and look upward and ask God what's the case. That's what the tree of life would have been about, and staying in a garden that would have been wonderful. Or we could have made decisions ourselves where we assume because A is not B that it's good. And what you find is that series of choices eventually reaches an end because it's dead. There is no root think that it leads to. And we are in that same case where we keep imagining, and this is the lie that needs to be debunked, is that when our guy comes in, the utopia will happen. America will be liberty, and it will go back to 1776, and the Constitution will be upheld. What in Donald Trump's actions has convinced you that that's the case? The guy is a petty tyrant, a little bit of an authoritarian, and I'm not saying that he's out there trying to cause mass fascism. He's not trying to do that. All he's doing is causing division in a sort of a venial sort of way, like one of the Gracchus brothers during Rome, if you know that, what would you call it? A demagogue, really. That's what it is. He's not a Hitler. He's not a Stalin. He's not any of these things. But what he is someone who can play this game very smartly. And I think he was put there in that position. And I look over the history of it. Donald Trump is our generation's Ronald Reagan. The games aren't that different. Reagan was a Democrat first who got popular by standing up against commies when there was the 68 riots in California. He was a member of the Screen Actors Guild. It was made famous by the same Hollywood that the right loves to scream against, but where people had no problem making money off them for decades. And he went forward in there, and what did we get? We got bigger government. We ended up getting, he cut the taxes, but ultimately we ended up getting a whole bunch of people brought into this country who changed the demography and led to some of the things for today. So when you look at this, and we could go back further, I could give you examples all day long. I don't know that we've had many good choices, and the ones we did probably got shot. And that's the nature of it, because you don't let $1 trillion enterprise go down the toilet because one person thinks about things the wrong way. That's American history for you. So I want you to see, and the reason I'm going into this is not because I really enjoy attacking Trump. I really don't care. But the thing about it is that you need to understand that, and we need more people who are seeking truth rather than to justify things. Because if you don't tell a story because it's going to upset people because they say, well, you can't tell that story, that helps the other side. Look, I'm going to say things that piss the right wing off. I've said enough things that piss the left wing off, and I'm not a left wing or a right wing guy. I'm a Christian. What do I actually believe? I believe we need to uphold morality and try to hold ourselves to a higher standard. I work at that despite having done the opposite much of my life. And I believe we have responsibility to the poor and responsibility to one another, and that being successful isn't just having a big house and a ton of money. That's really not a good example of it. And if you ever read the Bible, you'd see differently. But people don't think from that mindset because instead we're engineered into this different mindset. So, why am I going into this long diatribe? Because you can't trust the news. You can't trust the media. And honestly, when you see both sides pushing hardest to force an issue, that's when you need to be willing to step away. And that's what today's show is kind of about. When is the right time to walk away from these problems? Because as the political thing gets funnier and you see more people being pushed into this conflict, which is going to start with, sporadic violence and eventually get bigger and more organized, you have to ask, what are you fighting for? Because if you fight your neighbor so that you guys destroy your neighborhood, all you're doing is creating the very demolition that allows the people with all those resources who engineered the very destruction of everything around you to go ahead and take advantage of it. And there's going to be a lot of places that's just going to happen. If you're in a city at this point, and I hate to say this because I don't want to hurt you, but I got to tell you the truth, you're probably screwed. You need to be getting out, and you need to be getting out before November. And I know that requires a lot of sacrifices and changes, but this is the best advice I can give you. I don't see a way to do it safely, but if you do, more things I recommend. You need to be able to defend yourself. And do not think defense is an individual action or just your family. You need friends who will help you because there's going to be numbers here and it's going to be unpredictable. So when that happens, you're going to need a neighborhood you can trust. If you don't know your neighbors or if you get along really poorly with your neighbors, now is the time to mend fences if you can. And if you can't find a new neighborhood, even if you can't leave the city, you can at least get to the exurbs, rent something somewhere else, because I don't think this gets better. I think it gets worse. And when it gets worse, if you study what happens when there's civil breakdowns, what happens? There's problems with power outages, there's problem with food supply, there's problems with things moving around. And keep in mind, at the backdrop to this, we also have this virus can come back around. It could either be a false lockdown that's put out for political reasons. It could be a real lockdown because there's a release of a new form of the virus. Or there could be a mutation. Any and all of these are on the table. And I don't know what story will be told, and I don't think it really matters. I think that what you should anticipate is that there will be less mobility for you in the future, and where you are is where you're going to need to be. So if where you are is not a place that works for you, or a place where you are in danger, you need to make a cold assessment of what's happening, and you need to begin making different decisions. And I tell you this because a day will come, and probably not so far a future, where people like myself who are still going out there and giving you guys last minute warnings will not be available to you. And then part of that will probably be, changes in what's permitted. You see so many things being shut down. I mean, let's use a simple example. Facebook has banned people from saying who won the election, right? And they've said, well, that's irresponsible. We're going to say, who gave them the authority? Who decided they get to count who wins? But you see this happening all over the place, and certain voices are censored, and certain voices are not censored, and certain people are charged, and certain people are not charged. And look, I get it, and I will be blunt with you on this too. If you have right-wing perspectives, you are being set up to be the enemy of the state in a way the left wing is not. But do not mistake that for thinking the state loves the far left. The state has been setting up the far left to go ahead and be the disposable fools the entire time. They fear the far right as the popular means that can actually offer opposition to them on a basis that is moral. And we need to find a different way to do that that's neither left nor right, but defines a new center. And I've talked about that over the years in some of my writings, and I've argued actually quite passionately, and at some risk to myself, that, it's in the reclamation of our traditional faith with localism and with communities taking the lead rather than things at the center. But these are the sort of questions that need to be asked moving forward. And so let me give some good advice to people about this, and we'll go into some practical tips today here in the second part of the show. We got, 35 minutes in. You're listening to Free Atlantic Radio. I am your host, Tom Kawczynski, and I am just talking about all sorts of stuff today. But you guys asked to know my thoughts, and I'm going to answer you because I care for you and I pray for you, each and every one of you, even the haters, especially the haters, actually, because how much more could you do with your life if you invested the energy you use into hating me, or hating anyone, or hating Trump, or hating Biden, or hating Republicans, or hating Democrats, or hating communists, or hating fascists, into actually changing the world for the better? But we always look for someone to do it for us. We're lazy people, let's be honest. I mean, we work hard, but we work in little narrow lines. We don't like to paint outside the colors, and sometimes you got to do that a little bit. Sometimes you got to be willing to say things that will be unpopular, and sometimes you have to have a little bit of bravery, and we haven't had people doing that for a while now. We've had people fall into camps, and we've found comfort in our camps, and the camps are getting bigger all the time. I mean, I will tell you, one of the things that has happened due to everything that's happening is the far right actually can work with the mainstream right these days, and it does happen a little bit, and they wouldn't ever want to say it, but at the end of the day, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And that's how this is happening. And there's just two big enemies that are going together to clash in this final confrontation, that the end of it will be the destruction of America as we know it, the impoverishment of the American people, and the creation of an authoritarian state that will probably be a sort of humanistic utopia where you will have no freedom, no liberty, no choice, and no sovereignty, and you will be sent to work, and you might feel good. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me, actually, if you end up with the Huxley ending, where they basically link your brain to the cloud, and it watches you, and it hits you with dopamine anytime you start to feel sad. So you go through in this little false life where you're like drones being driven by your own chemistry. I mean, it's much like the Matrix, and that's where we're heading to. And these are the fights going forward. And, it's a fight for humanity, if you really understand it. It's beyond, simple color. It's about the question of whether or not you want to have choice as people. And if you give such power over to a system, it's going to take it. Power abhors a vacuum. And, if you make something so powerful, that's what's going to happen. Can you resist this? I don't know. I have so many people asking me, well, Tom, what are we going to do to fight it? What are we going to do to beat this? And I've put as much energy as anyone in this country you'll find, and it can't happen because we're too busy fighting each other. If I were to go out there and organize something, and I've tried a couple times, all that will happen is I'll have 6 papers in Portland write horrible stories on me. I'll have a couple crazy people go ahead, threaten and harass me, and no one will help because they'll be like, I don't want to go into that because we have no loyalty to one another. We have no grace toward one another. We are not reasonable at all, and we have this perverted and corrupted view of nature that is very difficult to solve. And ultimately, I've kind of added a fifth value that I've informally thought of, which is that we're motivated by bad spirit. We're motivated by spirit of malice and covetousness and all that. And I call it sin in my books, but, you call it what you like. If you don't act with generosity and an idea of righteousness and goodness, if you just act in blatant self-interest, how is that ever going to work? And yet that's what our ideologies shake out to. We have one ideology where we say self-interest is I can believe whatever I want and you can't tell me what to do. The left has the ideology of adult infantilism where everyone goes around and plays dress up and thinks that makes reality. The right, conversely, has this idea that I'm going to handle all the toys. So some combination between bullying and grabbing. It's a bit like the older brother where instead of responsibly playing with the other who's crying the whole time, what it does is it just grabs everything and says, I'm not going to do anything. So we have a brat and a spoiled child, and that's what we have for our ideological process. We don't have things that care about the poverty of our people, or at least the identity of the people, our beliefs. We don't even allow ourselves to have those conversations because we say, well, that's too unpleasant. We're not going to talk about that. Instead, we live in fantasy land. And the problem is when your nation lives in fantasy land and when your people are stuck in reality, things fall apart around you. And I assure you, the fact that all this has been pushed is not just cowardice of people. This is the deliberate action of not just decades, but the more I understand it, centuries of efforts to introduce ideas into our culture that are destructive to us. The most pressing of which is that we worship creation over the creator, and that we think that somehow material progress is going to be a substitute for moral integrity. And whatever your political beliefs are, consider this: if you put the ends before the means, at some point someone will do the same to you. And that's how we always end up in the same fights over and over and over again. So what's the solution to it? The solution to it is that you need to begin putting things in a different sense. Understand what you are. Get yourself spiritually right. I would recommend, as your soul depends on it, you get right in the Word and you accept Jesus as your Savior. But regardless of whether or not you're willing to listen to my proselytization, what you need to do is begin preparing to have people around you can trust. And you have to think what basis you're trusting them on. If you're trusting people on the basis of expediency, right, then remember, if it's expedient for them to help you one day, it might be expedient for them to take from you the next day. You get a guard dog in your house you love, don't feed him for 6 months, watch what happens. Nature comes out, and you have to be aware of those things. And if you don't have a different nature, you're going to have those problems. So what do you need to have? People will tell you need to have access to food, you need to have access to water, access to the ability to protect yourself, access to electricity. That's going to be a big one. If things get funny, you better be ready for brownouts and rolling power outages. And do you have a plan to protect your food supply? Do you have a plan to provide electricity? Do you have a generator? In your neighborhood, do you trust the people around you? Are you safe? And if you're not, you need to begin making connections with people now, and that needs to be your point of emphasis. And look, I understand the way the world supposedly runs. All of us chase money, and I'm telling you, I've demonstrated. How many shows have I demonstrated? Money's made up. It's make-believe money. It's as fake as the monopoly money. The only difference is we give credit to it because we like the idea of the tangibility of it. We like the idea it has purpose. But in the time that we've been going broke, that tens of millions of fellow Americans have been out of money, out of work, out of hope, can't get stimulus, can't get unemployment support, the Fed has been writing blank checks, going money printer go brrr, and they've been buying the whole economy because we let them play the game. We let them play their fictions to the detriment of our very survival. And that's what you need to get out of. You need to think, what will be real in the world when the game goes away? Because at some point, what's going to happen here is a lot of fictions are going to disappear. The moment the goods stop moving and the fighting starts, and I can't tell you when it's going to happen. It could be later today, could be on election day, could be later. But this level of acrimony is simply unsustainable. And regardless of who wins, or if no one wins, which is what I actually suspect will be put out there in a way where both sides will be able to take claim because that makes the violence worse. We will see people begin to act, well, the reality of this is that old world is dead. And I told you on Coronavirus Central many, many months ago, in February, actually, if you go back, you can find the old shows, that the old world died and you need to recognize the new world. We have not built a foundation for this new world. Instead, we're still fighting like scavengers over the scraps of the old one. And those scraps have kept on for quite a while, but we haven't realized that something fundamental has shifted. And that is that we cannot exist the way we used to exist anymore. I mean, and people imagine they can go back. If we just open up, if we just do these things, you can't do it because you've been engineered to a point where morally you will not accept that. If you're a Democrat and Trump wins, you're going to go to war. If you're a Republican and Biden wins, you're going to go to war. And whether that war is passive or aggressive, the tail is going to lead the dog, because you have at this point at least 5% on each side who's more than happy to go out there and solve this problem one bullet at a time. And I'm not endorsing it, by the way. In fact, I've been the voice speaking out most clearly against it to people on both sides. But you know what's happened? I started out this program being attacked by the left for being a right-wing Nazi, and now I get attacked by the right from the left for being a full-on commie for not backing the president. I'm the same guy I always was, a sane, rational guy who hides in a cabin in the woods because people are nuts. And that's my lesson to you. The people are nuts. They're crazy. And they're getting crazier because they're desperate and they want a new start. And so what happens is they get a Messiah complex, right? And whether you believe that Messiah is in the work of Marx or in the work of Trump, there's only one Messiah, Christ. And Christ told you this world is going to deceive you. It's going to betray you. And so what is the message there? The message is that you need to be learning how to look past deceptions. You need to look past what people say is true and past the legitimacy or illegitimacy of a source to the motives behind it. And what are people seeking in this world? They're seeking power, they're seeking safety, they're seeking self-aggrandizement, they're seeking wealth, they're seeking control. And when you look at the people who have the most resources, who are accomplishing the most, the people we should be covering in our news, but yet we somehow never seem to talk about, never seem to care about, what are they doing? Well, they're getting out. They're heading for the exits. They're taking the wealth. They're taking the goods. And they're leaving the rest of us to say, hey, well, we're going to take care of you. We're going to do this or we're going to do that. And they're going to have programs to change us, to make us better. And whether it'll be because we need to get the economy going, because Lord knows you need to make your money so that you can enjoy your comfy life. Or whether it's we're going to give justice so you can take your money from the people who are working. If you're still obsessed over money, if you're still obsessed over material, if you're still obsessed over status, they're going to get you. And the left and the right, they're just caught up in the same bird. That's all it is. It's a vulture. It's eating itself. It's pecking its own liver. You know, that's what's happening, and that's what I see out there. And I don't know what to tell people other than that. For those who care, get away from it. You know, I can't tell you can save your lives for what's coming. You can save your souls. You can get right with Christ. And if you find people who think that way, I genuinely believe that is the pathway by which you can actually build a community based on trust. Because what I keep telling people who ask me this is you need to be around people you can trust now, because you can't believe the news and you can't believe the media. And look, I will do my best to offer analysis of what's happening out there. I will try to give you facts. I will give you commentary. And look, I have no problem taking haymakers at both sides. I mean, I spend a lot of time attacking the insanity of the left, and I probably will make a lot of Christians unhappy in the future because I'm going to attack prosperity gospel because I believe it's unbiblical. And the idea that God didn't put you here because he wants you to be rich. God put you here so that you have the opportunity to learn his ways, not that, you know, he gives you what you want, but he gives you what you need. And that's what the other question is. You need to start figuring out what you need versus what you want and be smart about it, because these are the bets you're making with your life. Up to this point, we've all been riding around with kiddie wheels where, you know, the big things we're worried about, losing our job, losing our status, losing that. They're very small things in the big scheme of things. Take it from me. Look, I've been attacked by actually, the BBC attacked me too. So I've been attacked by international media before for saying something that I thought was quite rational, which I said, by the way, I don't think Islam belongs in Western civilization. And I genuinely believe that. I still believe that. I've never recanted from that, and they never forgive me for that. But that's what I believe. You know, they have the right to believe what they want to believe. I think it's wrong, but I say that. But ultimately, people haven't learned how to deal with deprivations. I've lost my job, or I've been a pariah. I've lost friends. You know, if I had any family left, I lost them for other reasons long ago, I would have maybe dealt with that. And what you learn is, one, that you can survive, but two, you learn that the real problems are the decisions of life and death that you have to make because people around you are self-caught up in what they're doing. I had people in my life who agreed with every word I said, betray me at a drop of a hat because of expediency, not because it would have even cost them, but just to keep up images. And what I will tell you is putting your faith in people will be a mistake if you do it. I mean, if you have a common understanding of interest and you have a certain small area within well-designed bounds, you can do some things together. But ultimately, as things get funny, people are going to get funnier, and you're not going to be able to trust one another. And we've already been engineered into that, and I hate that I have to share that message with you because I want to put out a positive message and an optimistic message and say, if we just do this, but the reality is there's not enough time and there's not enough desire. So things are going to get far worse before they get better, and they're going to get absolutely abominable before something will change, where either A, we'll go into a long period of subjugation, and then maybe 3 generations later our kids will escape this. B, more likely we'll all be hooked up to a machine. Or C, you pray for tribulation and the Lord saves us from our own stupidity. These are the sort of choices we're looking at. And I know that's a dismal analysis, but look, my friends in the movement used to always say black pill Tom is best Tom. And what was that? That's the person who tells you what you need to hear versus what you want to know. It's my curse to be the adult in the room who goes forward and says, in sometimes a dour voice, but in full honesty to you, these are the stakes. And as these stakes go forward, counting on people to save you, counting on the government to help you, counting on FEMA to be your friend, all these things, counting on, the trains to keep running, the power to keep going, the switches to work, you can't count on any of those things. You can count on God, and maybe if you're lucky, you can count on yourself. That's a black pill statement. And I don't like that I have to talk this way. I don't really like that it is this way. I wish, and I tried for years, even before I got fired, I was trying to build something different where, people could walk away from this system. But it's not just the U.S., it's global. I mean, you look at how they've shut down Montreal up in Canada for our friends up there. News Frères, I hope you guys are okay. And it's not really a political problem. I mean, the laws are fine. I don't like them. I could do better, but it's not about that either. It's like my book said, there's not a political solution to a spiritual problem. And we are possessed of a spirit of malice and covetousness and self-righteousness. I mean, we are indulgent of a sinful nature, and there's a consequence to that. We're possessed by our wrath and our lust, and we've lost the ability to look at things as they are. We don't see things as they are. We see things as how they advance our interest. And people would say, people who are supposedly wise would say, well, you can't choose to be any other way, and that's a load of crap. It always has been. But they say, well, that's the nature of the world, and there's truth in that. I'll admit that. But that we used to structure our society to mitigate and cast aside that, and now we celebrate that. And both sides do that. Both sides don't even think about that. They're like, that's just human nature. Did we ever think human nature is the problem? Did we ever think this idea that somehow we were so brilliant that we could just do whatever we wanted and it would work out well, that we can decide we're never going to grow up and we're going to play with all our toys that were given us, that it would have a happy ending? No. But who's the biggest child out there who's always had toys his whole life and gets a new one whenever they break? Donald John Trump. That's out there. And the people who act just that way are people like Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell, and Kevin McCarthy. People who are well-funded to tell lies for others and get to have toys and play with people like lives like their little Matchbox toys. And that's our leadership group. And who really controls them? Well, who controls the money? We always say it's all about the money. Well, it's about the Federal Reserve. It's about the banking system. It's about the families that own them. It's about nobility going back, But people say, oh, you can't ask those questions. You have a tinfoil hat. That's not the way the world works. That's exactly the way the world works. You control people by their lust and their desires. If people lust for money, you control them with money. If people lust for sex, you control them with the eyes. There's all of these things, and you have to decide what you're about now and what's going to control you. And if you can do that intelligently and have others around you, you got a chance to survive. And then you do smart things. You get yourself food. You get storable food. You get water. You go out to the country. You go somewhere people won't pay too much attention to you, and you try to ride this out. You make some friends. If you're fortunate enough and you're really blessed to live in a good area, maybe you get a couple counties working together, a couple towns. You get a little area of stability. Start putting some food. If you're not getting seeds, what are you waiting for? I'm going to go buy a couple 100 pounds of potatoes this week, God willing. You know why? Because I don't trust I can get them in December. I'm getting them now. Plan ahead. Think about what's important to you. And here's what it should be. It should be your own morality, your salvation. That's first and foremost. And then from that, once you understand that, you can help your family. You can help the people around you love. You can be a benefit to your community. You can say, hey, this is stupid. We're not going to do this. Because a choice is going to come in the not-so-distant future where things are going to get funny and you can either be part of the madness or not. And that choice might be individual. It's always individual. It may be collective. Make it larger. And we're going to have to make choices that. And look, the answer isn't, and so people say, well, then you're just letting them get away with it. No, I'm not letting anyone getting away with it. I'm walking away. That's why I'm not voting. That's why I'm not really even an American at this point. What's there to serve in this country? You know, from the very first we said we don't want God in our country. Well, God, you know, people will say when things get funny that oh, why did God do this to us? God gave us what we wanted. We told God to piss off a long time ago. If you can't see that, I mean, we ignored every rule. We've basically said you're a fantasy tale. I mean, we go ahead and grab our Bibles like rubbing a genie's lamp and saying that, hey, go ahead and provide for us when we need it, but otherwise go be gone. And that's what it is. And if you treat, you know, you want to have a thing of jinn, that's a demonic spirit from the Islamic world, you end up with a world like that, where that's all we're possessed by. And I know people will say, oh, Tom's gone off the rails. Tom should be talking about just these objective facts. What do you want me to tell you? Do you want me to describe the color tapestry of the destruction of this country and the degradation of this world? I mean, I could. But what difference would it make? You'd feel safer because I give it to you in slow motion so you don't have to see the big picture. You want to just stare at the setting sun of the final, autumn, fall before we end up in the American winter? I could do that. Would that make you happier? I don't think you listen to this show for this reason. I mean, people who listen to me, let me give some credit to the audience, to you guys out there listening. I know that I get up every day when I do this, and I basically kick you in a tender spot. And I don't do it because I like to do it. In truth, the few who've met me will tell you I'm actually an incredibly congenial person who does not like to go out and do these sorts of things. But I do it because it's true. I don't do it because it brings me joy. I don't do it because I even want to do it at this point. I really don't. I had fun writing books, and eventually I'll probably go back to that full time. And it's safer for me for a lot of different reasons, because honestly, the more I say, the more I get attacked. And, you know, I have responsibilities too, but one of my responsibilities as a Christian is to speak the truth and help good people. And I wish that I could take so many of you, man. Just so many good people out there. You know who you are, and I don't want to say your names. You know, out there in the fields of north central Pennsylvania, and out there down in Kansas, you know who I'm talking about there. My buddy out there in Kentucky, you know, I'm thinking about you. Even in the slums of Newark, man. I mean, I want to get you out of there. Got my buddy out in California, and I think of these people, you know. My good man up there in Quebec, you know, got to work on him. He's got a little work he needs done, but, you know, and it's and all different people, different backgrounds, others too, more than I can mention, you know. That keen for my New Hampshire friend, right? You know, it's too bad that we let ourselves be set up in a world where the stuff around us mattered more than the people. That these big ideologies of worldliness mattered more than spirituality, and that we didn't find a way to make the land we were given, instead of making it into a wasteland, we could have made it into a garden. And you know, I don't mean to sound like an eco-hippie, although I love the land, man. I work the land. I understand it. And the land beats the crap out of me, but it's honest and it's fair and it teaches humility, and that's not a bad virtue. You know, we say, oh, I have pride in my cause. I have pride in my party. If pride is such a great virtue, why does everyone agree humility is a good thing? It's a question no one asked, but we really ought to, because ultimately, if it's all about you, then there's not a lot of space for anything else. And what I'm going to recommend to each and every one of you is that you begin thinking on these questions, because you probably won't have time in the future to be worried about those unless you're very well prepared. And even then, you're still going to be busy, because I do think things are coming apart. And I don't know what's going to happen next, but I do feel in my soul that this is a scripted outcome where we are seeing ourselves being led to the deliberate destruction of this country. I said that in the coming Civil War. I said that in incoming hot takes and red lines from the coming Civil War. And I also said that in a different way in God We Must, which, by the way, go get it on Amazon. It might help explain why things worked out the way they did. And you know what? What do I do with my days? I read the Bible. I pray. I mean, I've been reading history. I've been reading the history of the Puritans and how they basically got corrupted, 200 years ago by this idea that, social justice was needed. It was called Unitarianism and Congregationalism. And it's terrible. It's the same thing over and over again. We try, and it's not, and this is the funny thing, it's not our bad impulses that get us in trouble. It's our good ones. We think we're going to go out there and help people. Very few people are going out there maliciously trying to do things. We really believe that we have the right of good, but we believe the ends justify the means, and we destroy each other and everything that's good and everything that's meaningful every time we do it. And it's just this great trick. And it's just, it's sad and it's pithy, but human civilization is caught in a Chinese finger trap. So here's my advice to you. When everyone else is pulling, you just let go and let it fall off. Have empty hands, have open hands, have free hands. Have a willingness to do something a little better. And we'll see what I'm going to cover this week. I don't know. Some people have been asking me to do a profile of Russia. I'm tempted. I'm really tempted because we should look at what Russia's doing. Russia's kind of hiding in the background, and they're clever. I like the Russians in some ways, because of course I came up in the right? So they're the good guys and the Chinese are the bad, even though I think they're working together. And there's an argument out there that's quite compelling that, goes back to people well before Yuri Bezmenov, that a lot of these Marxist things that were put forward, the idea that the Red Menace went away was just a joke. And it kind of seems like it. So maybe we should take a look at that. We'll take a look at some of the deeper issues if I get a little time to look at it, because I think it'll be fascinating. And you know what? I give you a better show if I talk about what I find interesting. And when I look at other stuff, like the things right in front of us, the simple reality, I can kind of lay out the pieces on the board, but I don't know if I trust my own eyes with what I'm seeing because I'm being lied to a lot. And so are you. But that's the one thing I try to do with this show. I don't lie to you. So let's pray for a second. Heavenly Father, I just pray that you give everyone who listens to this program eyes to see and ears to listen, that they understand the world as it is, and that you honor your promise as we know you will, that everyone who seeks wisdom will have it granted to them, and that more people will ask that so they can gain understanding of this world, so they can seek the safety of their souls, the safety of their loved ones, their families, and their communities, so that your peace and tranquility can advance throughout the world, and so that we may live in love and greater harmony. So I pray that, the message of the gospel comes forward, the good news that Jesus Christ had to share, so we remember there are things beyond this world that are worth fighting for. So in Jesus' name, I pray that, and I pray the blood of Christ over all those who will accept it. Amen. I'll be back to talk with each and every one of you on Wednesday. I'll probably record another show tomorrow. We'll see if I do. I'm going to do some research on Russia today because I think that's what I want to cover. That's interesting. Please check out all the other episodes at AtlanticHomeland.com. I may even do a little bit on YouTube later because I've been wanting to talk about some other things that are a little bit apart from this. Some of you might find interesting. And for those who want to send support, really is appreciated because it does take a lot of time to do this, believe it or not. CVC PRV is the Venmo, and P.O. Box 35, Greenville Junction, Maine, 04442. Other than that, God bless you. You guys have a great day.